My name is Jill Klingon. I am the co-teach Comp and Lit department chair. And first of all, have to say that I'm sitting outside of my porch, so there'll be a little bit of competition with some roosters in my background, so I apologize. But we're doing a session on reading aloud, which it's been really fun to plan that with Lisa. And as we were prepping for the session, I realized how read alouds have been really a part of my life, like forever. And one of my very first memories is my mom reading to me. And when I was little, I remember one of the most exciting gifts that I got, which is in this picture, and I also have them here, as you can see, my very, very, very well-used copies of Little House on the Prairie books. And my mom read these to me. If like literally the covers are falling off. I've been through these so many times, but my mom read them to me when I was couldn't read yet for myself, or couldn't read chapter books anyway. And then I read them over and over. And then when with our kids, we read that series to our kids too. So reading aloud has been really important. Also, when I was in elementary school, I remember my teacher, like Mr. Vincent in fifth grade, reading, and I remember us always trying to get him to read another chapter to us. And then in high school too, and I literally had this memory last night that I had completely forgotten about, that I had a teacher who would read to us after lunch, my English teacher, and I must have been the year I was taking geometry, because I had a piece of graph paper, and while she was reading, I would just sit and like color in all the different little squares, and I still have that somewhere, not because it's a great work of art, but because it was just tied to like a great memory of read alouds. So that's what we're here to talk about today.
Thank you, Jill. And similarly, when thinking about this session, immediately went to the picture book cover or chapter book cover by my picture, Mr. Dunn. I think it's interesting how all of us remember the teachers that would read these books to us from our youth. And similarly, I still have my copy. Mr. Dunn introduced me to this new author, Judy Blume. My own kids have read the same book. They've updated the text a little bit from the 80s, but I think it's a testament to the power of books and the power of read alouds. So in this session, for a very short time together, we hope to share with you the power of read alouds and why they matter, how to include read alouds, especially from our older students in middle school and high school, where it might be a little trickier to insert, a book into your school day. And then we will end with our very own read aloud. So to start off our session together, Jill's going to walk us through this memory.
So Lisa and I just kind of talked about some of our own favorite read aloud memories. And so I don't know if that sparked for any of you memories of when you were growing up and teachers or your parents that read aloud to you. So we just wanted to open it up if anybody wanted to, turn off their mic and share about a memory, or if you want to pop it into the chat. We just kind of wanted to open it up with that. Just that any memories that you all might have.
My mom read The Hobbit to me, and I can picture in the room every night, and we had a giant picture book, like it was the illustrated Hobbit. And I don't remember if the language was kid friendly. I don't think it was. I think it was the actual text. And to this day, whenever like any of the cool movies that are out or whatever, I always just picture those illustrations, because it took a while to read, so we had a lot of time together. So that's when I remember. As well as I have that same yellow book set, Jill, in the closet right behind me.
I don't know if you all know the Little Men and Little Miss book series from, the early 80s. But they're kids' books, and my dad would read us those every night, and he would do all the fun voices. So, Mr. Busy's voice was super fast, and Mr. Slow's voice was very slow, and we had the full range of very low voices and very high voices. For those of you who met my dad, he had this thick Brooklyn accent. And so doing all of these fun voices, like I can still hear them in my head.
I love that. And Brian said he remembers reading, and then there were none to a class of high school sophomores, and they were enthralled. Yes, and reading scripts of plays out loud. That is definitely a fun thing. Anybody else have a memory they want to share? well, if you think of any more as we talk today, feel free to pop it into the chat. But I guess we can move on.
Okay. So we thought we'd do just a quick little true and false game about different topics in Read Aloud. So feel free to show a thumbs up or down, thumbs up for true, thumbs down for false. And Truman's gonna walk us through some of these statements. Okay, true or false? It is more important for elementary age students to practice reading than be read to by their teacher. Truman says false. So we know that teachers need a balanced approach to reading. Yes, students have to hold books and turn the pages and point to words, especially our beginning readers. But we also have heard throughout the day that read alouds are important, they're powerful, and they are a very integral part of teaching students how to read. Okay. Next, true or false. Oops, let me move this a little bit. True or false, reading books aloud to students in grade 6 and higher serves no or little purpose. Oh, I see a thumbs down from Sarah. Truman is going to help us and say, you're right, Sarah. Research has shown that reading aloud benefits all learners in middle and high school too. Hearing books read aloud improve comprehension, reduce stress, and expose students to different types of text. And I feel like this statement has been talked about in different ways, especially in our last session together. Jeff talked about bringing the affective filter down, especially for English language learners. Read alouds have the power to do this. And that exposure to all different text, all types of literacies, Read Aloud can also be a means to that. Okay. And then lastly, true or false? 5 minutes of reading aloud every day to students can make a difference. I know that we all know 5 minutes can go by like that in the classroom, especially when we're crunched for time or if it's at the end of the semester. But this statement is true. A recent study by Scholastic Books found that approximately 83% of students aged 6 to 17 love or loved being read to. The list of benefits are related to academic success and improved mental health. Those two things are very significant in the life of our students. So moving along, we're going to dive a little bit into elementary. Some of you know that in our elementary program, whether it is ELA, math, or science, we have a book in every lesson. And the reason is because literacy happens across subjects. The power of read alouds are high, and they can also be very low stakes, something that all students can engage in. And we sometimes have the pleasure of getting to read aloud to your students when we visit our partner schools. And read alouds are a foundation of the elementary program. We also have a lot of video read alouds, similar to what Catherine showed earlier today, with a book read aloud through YouTube. And so that's another way that read alouds are always in our elementary curriculum. So what is the power, or why read aloud? Well, first and foremost, there's an academic focus to reading aloud. Regardless if they're English learners, young students who are increasing their vocabulary need to hear vocabulary in context. It makes a huge difference if you are hearing a word in the context of a story, or whether it's nonfiction or fiction, rather than just learning a definition of a word. And we also know that for students increasing their vocabulary, they have to hear a word 28 times before it actually becomes part of their own vocabulary and they own it. So read alouds help this repeated lesson in vocabulary for many of our students. for our younger students who are learning to read, there is a lot of phonemic awareness and phonics in action when we are reading aloud. So Dr. Seuss books, all the rhyming that students hear, that is coming into their brain space. They are making sense of the sounds and how they put sounds together. In Read Alouds, students also see phonics in action. If I am reading in math class a book about shapes, I can also highlight the sh sound. So every time they hear that word shapes, they're knowing, they're making the connection. Oh, that's the letter SH being put together to make the sh sound. And then also Read Alouds bring to life practicing and learning about how to make meaning through reading comprehension. So it's not enough just to read a book. Like Angie said, so much about literacy is making meaning. So our read alouds help our students go beyond answering yes or no questions. We want them looking slowly and intently at illustrations to make predictions about what might come next in the book. We want them to look again at the illustrations or text features or even the text to find evidence that they hear or read to then use as evidence for why they think a certain way. And the read alouds help them think critically and go beyond what is even just on that page a lot of times. The teacher reading aloud or modeling the reading is also really valuable. So many of our students benefit from listening to what fluent reading sounds like. You know, it's a lot of us mentioned that our teachers read books before we could read, or they read books at a higher level of what we as students were able to read at that time. And that helps with us learning, you know, this is what someone who is fluent sounds like. This is what intonation or pace when you're reading sounds like. The read alouds also help students listen to what correct grammar and structure and even what complete sentences sound like, similar to what Jeff mentioned about correcting students with grammar. Like it can be subjecting them to read alouds also helps them hear what English grammar sounds like. And then the other thing, there's so much we could talk about in this session, but the planning that goes into read alouds, we'll have to save for another session. But teachers can always do what they call think alouds. So model like, you know, I notice in this picture, the characters are da, 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 da. I wonder what that means for later in the story. And so hearing teachers think aloud can also help students think in their heads and make meaning of the books. And then read alouds are also fun. Teachers, you know, can dress up. I used to have one partner teacher that would wear props when he would read a book. You can, as some folks mentioned, have different voices for the characters. You can have your students join in regardless of the age, especially if there's like pattern sentences or phrases that are repeated in a picture book. Students love to engage that way as well. We know we've had this topic, I don't know if it was the last in-person conference with our partners in Brazil, but we talked about a lot about emotional literacy. And again, I think this has been touched on with the other sessions. Read alouds also can approach tough topics to address with our students, whether it's racism or immigration or family issues like divorce or blended families. A story, a picture book, or read aloud can help develop students' empathy or see things from different perspectives, put themselves in the shoes of a character. And again, bring a calming presence to the classroom, and also help, like I mentioned, the tough discussions or tough topics. This one particular reading researcher Molly Ness on the picture, she has a lot of great research, and I always enjoy going to her website for information. And a lot of our elementary partners use RAS Plus for access to books. And so she sometimes also gives webinars about read alouds through RAS Plus, which is, again, something we can talk about more later. And then lastly, like we've heard, diversity and representation matter for our students. Luckily, at this time in our world, we have so many ways to access books that feature families that look different from us, kids that look different from us. And similar to the emotional literacy, books, read alouds, having this regular practice with your students not only helps strengthen their own identity, but also just that helps give them the empathy with dealing with different situations, different people. Some of you may be familiar with this quote from Dr. Reading Sims Bishop. You know, she sort of coined the quote and phrase that books are mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors. So books can help us look at maybe what ourselves could be, what our kids could be if they see kids that look like them in books. Books also are windows. They offer new perspectives, possibly that aren't possible in your own life. And they're also sliding glass doors for you to walk through and have new adventures or new opportunities. So again, this topic, Jill and I could go on for hours about read alouds, but we don't have enough time. And I want also to have us move into read alouds for the upper grades. So with that, Jill's going to take it away.
So it's probably no surprise to all of you as educators that the power of read alouds for older learners is very, very similar to the power of read alouds for our younger learners. So just like Lisa was talking about, reading aloud helps students increase vocabulary and reading comprehension skills. We might think of that specifically with our English, our English language learners, just that being read to can really help increase those vocab skills. Also, when teachers are reading aloud to their older students, they're modeling fluent reading and correct grammar. Also, reading aloud to older students, just like with that social emotional learning aspect, helps improve empathy and problem solving skills and conflict resolution skills. And also, I really, really, really love the image in that last slide about how books are windows into worlds that are different from us, and they're mirrors that can reflect our own experiences and our students' own experiences. And then sliding glass doors that can just transport us into another world, and just the amazing power of that. So next slide. I'm going to go talk a little bit more about reading aloud for middle school and high school learners. So one way that read alouds are great in a classroom for older students is that it exposes students to literature that they may not receive with a traditional textbook, or it also just makes more complicated texts more accessible. For example, in the Comp and Lit series, when students read Romeo and Juliet, that's tough, right? That's not easy for us to sit and just, read through. There's a lot of difficult language, a lot of difficult sentence structures, all those things. And so if that is being read aloud to the students, or the students are, even as a, group taking different parts and reading that together, that just makes those texts more accessible. Even like with my own son, he in the class that he's in, it was actually funny because he came home and he told me that they were going to be reading this play called A Tempest. And I was like, oh, he means The Tempest by Shakespeare. And then I found out, oh, no, actually it's a French adaptation of The Tempest, and it takes place in the Caribbean, and it's in the aftermath of colonialism there. So like if Jack picked up this play like on his own and it wasn't read in class, like there's a lot of complicated historical perspectives. There's a lot of things happening in that play that he wouldn't be able to absorb. But when it's being read aloud in a classroom, they can pause and discuss, these big ideas and these complicated things that are happening, and just be able to make that text more accessible. Read alouds also increase student engagement, understanding, and motivation. And we're actually going to talk a little bit more about that later with some ideas about doing that here in just a few minutes. So next slide. Read alouds also expose students to new authors, genres, and themes. I don't think that I would have ever really thought that I would have necessarily liked Gothic fiction. But when my teacher read Edgar Allan Poe's The Telltale Heart to me in high school, like I can still hear him reading that, and just, us on the edge of our seats just listening. And that's something I don't think I would have necessarily picked up on my own. And now that's a genre that I like. It also, reading aloud represents diversity in a way that counteracts stereotypes and helps students develop compassion for others. And we're going to do our own little read aloud at the end of this session. And the book that we're going to read a portion of is really, I think, a really great example of that for ourselves, and then also for our students. And then also, read alouds allow students to experience other worlds and situations. Like, I homeschooled my daughter for a few years when she was in elementary school, and the history curriculum that I chose used stories to teach history. And we both looked forward every day to that time when, we'd sit on the couch and I would read to her a story about whatever time period that we were learning about. And I say we because I was learning right along with her, because I had the dry textbooks to read where I was just memorizing, right, when I was a kid. And so I would learn, right along with her. And I remember a lot of those historical stories that I read to her, and she remembers that too. And she remembers way more than what I remember from when I just had to just memorize all the facts in a really dry way. So when we are immersed into other worlds and situations, that just helps us remember it, but it also, bringing back to the point above, helps us develop compassion and empathy for the people who have lived or who are living the stories that we're learning about. Next slide. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how to incorporate read alouds. One way that is one of the simplest ways is to read aloud or use audiobooks for the text that you're already, that teachers are already teaching in the classroom. And these are the books, some of the books in the Comp and Lit series. I will say the graphic novel, The Odyssey, may not be the easiest one to do as a read aloud, but I just put that there because we have the Odyssey and excerpts from it in the 1B course, and reading that aloud in class can help with students understanding and just make it a little more enjoyable. For both Romeo and Juliet and The Giver, we include an audiobook links in the course. And so that's one way that students can read along, but also be read to. And so that's just one little bit simpler way to just be able to help students understand a little bit more, enjoy a little bit more, and who doesn't like to be read to? So that's one way to incorporate read alouds in the classroom. Next slide. So before I talk about this slide, I just want to point out this picture here, because it's not actually a Mizzou Academy classroom, but the teacher of this class, Haley Thompson, she is part of Mizzou Academy because she's an instructional specialist in our Comp and Lit courses. And she teaches also in the school district where my son is a part of. And she sent me this picture on the first day of school. And this is her classroom, and that's my son waving. But and I include it because, well, for one, it's just such a cozy classroom. Like, wouldn't you like to be read to while you were sitting in this classroom? But just also because she is part of Mizzou Academy, and I really enjoy that picture. They decided to make a big desk. That's how they decided to structure the class, and that's how they're doing the class this year. So anyway, Oh, and also actually another point about this is while my son was in this class today, and it was right when Catherine was starting to talk earlier, he sent me, I was like, Jack, you couldn't have just timed this better. But he sent me this text that said, Mom, the short stories I told you about last night that I thought you would like is Speech Sounds and the Book of Martha by Octavia Butler. And I was like, oh, I mean, he doesn't know I like this author anyway, and he was just sharing with me. I'm not sure if Haley read read these stories aloud or not, but I was like, this is such a great example of him sharing with me these stories that he thought that I would like, that they were learning in their classroom. So couple other ideas. One is to pull a vocabulary word from the Read Aloud for students to listen to and discuss. And this can be a way to make it, you can make it a game. Like put somehow on a piece of paper or board or somewhere, like what the vocabulary word is that students may not know. And then that will help them pay attention, right? As they're kind of like trying to listen and who's going to be the one who's going to hear that word. And then, when you read that word, then just to pause and to stop and talk about it. You maybe use context clues and try to, just figure out like what that word might mean. And another thing, and this is, I think, really important, is that I know, because I know how full our curriculum is, that like I can imagine teachers saying, well, there's so much to do. I don't know how we're going to incorporate just reading aloud in class. And so I get that. I totally get that. There's a lot that we have going on in our courses and a lot of things to do, but even just taking 5 minutes at the beginning or the end of class to read aloud, to just have a book that you're reading to the students can just be a way to sort of, at the end of class, just kind of close, just settle things down. And it also could be, if you're doing it at the end of the class, my guess is that if you're ending on a cliffhanger, that's going to be what they're talking about, right? As they walk out the door. And isn't that great to think about, our students talking about literature as they're leaving and going on to their next class or wherever they may go. So I just want to say that as just a point of encouragement, because we can have all these big ideas about all these big, for reading aloud, but I also know that it's not feasible to include a whole bunch in a lot of classrooms. So even just 5 minutes can really make a difference. Okay, next slide. Another idea is to read a poem. So I think poetry is a really great way to begin a class. There's something about poetry there's something about the rhythm and the language that is sort of settling and calming. And so I think just, if that is like the cue for class to start, and also this is something, that doesn't have to take a lot of time, is just reading a poem to your students. And that, can really just take just a few minutes. I know that like I just in my daily life, I try to read like, I always for sure have a cup of coffee in my hand, but I often read a poem every morning. And one of the reasons I do that is that it just helps me just kind of settle into my day. And I notice, I notice that my day usually goes better if I take just those moments. And I think that can just kind of help our students sort of settle and get ready for the class. Couple of ideas, if, of course, teachers can read these aloud themselves, but another idea is the Ars Poetica YouTube channel. I put this picture there that actually I listened to this poem this morning. I encourage you to listen to it today. It's a really, really nice poem on kindness. So, and they have it really produced really well. So that's a nice way to do it. Listening to the Slow Down podcast is another, just a few minutes of just like playing that podcast. It's usually just, 5-6 minutes long, introducing a poem and then hearing it being read. Another idea that I know some of my the teachers do at my kids' school is First Chapter Fridays. And this is a great way to get, Catherine, yes, Poetry Unbound. I saw that pop up. That's another really good one. That's a little longer, so I didn't put that one on there, but that's a great podcast as well. First Chapter Fridays is another great idea to get students, or whatever day, it doesn't have to be Friday, but where you just read one chapter out of a book to the students, and then and that's it. And then if that intrigues them, then they can go check it out from the library or get it somehow. And then they, to encourage some reading, on their own, but also, this that time of reading to them. And then another idea is just reading aloud articles about current or historical events. It doesn't even have to be a full book or, poem or whatever. What is going on in the world, or what are you learning in history, or what are what is it that, and just reading a short, stories, like article that you find online about it. That's a story. Like that's another way to just incorporate reading aloud into the classroom. Next slide. These were just some ideas that I have. There's a lot of other ones, but I just put those up there. But anyway, we can go on to the next one because I know we want to get to our own read aloud. So I don't know how many of you have read the book Wonder by R.J. Palacio. It's probably more of a middle grade book, but I mean anybody, like I loved this book so much. I've read it a couple of times, and it's a movie also. It's a really great book. So I'm gonna just read a little bit of it to you, and then another way that when you're incorporating read alouds is kind of then reading and then using maybe some, like a few sentence starters, just to get students talking about kind of their own response to it. And this isn't necessarily, this is just to get them to be kind of listening and then to provide their own, like, what stood out to me. I'm wondering, I feel, just some things that that they can connect to. So I'm just going to read just a tiny, tiny bit of this book. And if you have not read it, and the cover is actually, well, I guess I don't have to show the cover, it's on the screen, but it's actually, it's a little clue as to what the book might be about. So I'm just going to read a tiny, tiny bit of it. And this first part is just called Ordinary. I know I'm not an ordinary 10-year-old kid. I mean, sure, I do ordinary things. I eat ice cream, I ride my bike, I play ball, I have an Xbox. Stuff like that makes me ordinary, I guess. And I feel ordinary inside. But I know ordinary kids don't make other ordinary kids run away screaming in playgrounds. I know ordinary kids don't get stared at wherever they go. If I found a magic lamp and I could have one wish, I would wish that I had a normal face that no one ever noticed at all. I would wish that I could walk down the street without people seeing me and then doing that look away thing. Here's what I think. The only reason I'm not ordinary is that no one else sees me that way. But I'm kind of used to how I look by now. I know how to pretend I don't see the faces people make. We've all gotten pretty good at that sort of thing. Me, Mom and Dad, Via. Actually, I take that back. Via's not so good at it. She can get really annoyed when people do something rude. Like, for instance, one time in the playground, some older kids made some noises. I don't even know what the noises were exactly because I didn't hear them myself, but Via heard and she just started yelling at the kids. That's the way she is. I'm not that way. Via doesn't see me as ordinary. She says she does, but if I were ordinary, she wouldn't feel like she needs to protect me as much. And Mom and Dad don't see me as ordinary either. They see me as extraordinary. I think the only person in the world who realizes how ordinary I am is me. My name is August, by the way. I won't describe what I look like. Whatever you're thinking, it's probably worse.
So in the spirit of trying to go through some of what we might ask our students to do, what stood out to you? Was there anything you were wondering or feeling? If I had not heard this book before, or perhaps even watched the movie, after this chapter that Jill read, I would want to know more about what this kid looks like or why he feels he's not normal. I was also thinking, Jill, like, again, like as sort of an exit ticket, kids could also put like one word on a Post-it to respond to what you read. And that's like an exit ticket out of the classroom if you're reading aloud at the end.
And Brian says, I'm wondering what happened to him. And Catherine said, the voice stood out to me. It is honest, fresh, and sounds like a young person.
Mm-hmm. So sharing, listening to how the students are interpreting, engaging with a read aloud, I think is really powerful. And it also gives you a little window into themselves, I think, as a person. I would think many of the emotions that August is feeling can also, apply to teens, perhaps not feeling always understood or seen in certain ways by their peers.
Right, because even though we get this idea that he looks different, like I mean, especially if as teenagers, but all of us, who hasn't felt like they stood out somehow in a way that made them uncomfortable or, felt self-conscious, or, you can see that in the story. And even though his story is different than our story, there's still something like a connection there.
And how we are all connected, even though, like you said, Jill, we look different, we sound different, we have different stories. I don't think I shared you this well, maybe I did, Jill, when we were planning. But I have my oldest is a freshman in high school, and he is a reluctant reader, like does not like to read anything. And when his reading lists, when the books came out for each subject and were published, for the families to purchase, I, of course, got way more excited than the books on his syllabus for English. And I did think about so I was up late last night reading one of the books because I already got it from the library. And I thought about it. I was like, okay, well, maybe I could do 5 minutes with him. Not every day, but maybe a week, when he's when there's some downtime, instead of him being on the phone at home, maybe we can pull out the book together and I'll read aloud and he can listen. So I've also thought about like reluctant readers and what read alouds how they can benefit them in the classroom, especially as kids get older.
Does anyone else have any last thoughts or reflections or questions?
I would like to emphasize that from a high school perspective, don't be afraid to read aloud. And I know you all said that, but just from my own experience, I taught ninth graders. That's kind of my passion. And you would think that they'd say we're too old for that or whatever, and they do not. They love it. They ask for it, and you can have the discussions along the way, which I think is really important. But they just love it. And even the ones that are ornery, they're kind of like putting their head down or whatever, they're hooked. So don't be afraid to give it a try, and shake it up a little bit. It's a lot of fun.
And I think that's something we don't grow out of. I mean, I love listening. I mean, I use audiobooks all the time, and it's because I love to be read to. And unfortunately, no one in my household reads to me. So I have to find, use Libby or Audible. But that works. So I think, it's something that I think we don't grow out of, and it's something, yeah, that I think we love it too. So, why wouldn't our students also? And it's a gift, it's a gift. I know we have a lot of things we have to fill in with our days and a lot of material to learn, but just how, a lot of us remember those people from our childhood who read to us. And that's something that, who knows, these days, your students may be talking about the teacher who read to them. And I think that's just a gift we can give our students. Well, thank you all.
Thank you
Bye.
both.
Wonderful session. Thank you guys. It was really lovely.
Thank you.